like to welcome Mr. Shabrinath Nair, Labor Migration Specialist for South Asia, Decent Work Technical Support Team, ILO. And to moderate the session, a warm welcome to Mr. Saurabh Jain, Partner, Supply Chain Transformation, PwC. Over to you, Mr. Jain.
Thank you so much, Isha. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking on this particular topic today, along with Shabrinath Nair. He's an expert in the area of labor migration. He works for International Labour Organization, ILO. So the topic we really have for today is, the migrant crisis and what we can do. The whole crisis is something what we've been kind of witnessing in the last couple of months. COVID-19 pandemic, is really having an unprecedented impact on workers in the supply chains. And especially if you think about it, most of the impact or the larger impact has been on the vulnerable groups, especially the low-paid migrant workers. And also, the so-called gig economy workers or gig economy players are also at a lot of risk because of this whole COVID-19 pandemic. One of the latest reports that I've seen, which talks about that there are over 4 crore migrant workers in India. They comprise 20% of the workforce, and they're extremely to the economy of India, and they work across all the sectors. Whether it's textiles, construction, manufacturing, mining, informal sector, and several MSMEs. So as a result of this whole pandemic, what really we've seen is that there has been a significant amount of job loss that has happened, especially for these less protected, low-paid migrant workers. And then this is a phenomena which we've seen across sectors, where this impact has come through. What really effectively it has happened is that the whole cumulative migration that happened in India to the larger cities for better jobs, for better quality of life, etc. It has kind of suddenly reversed the whole migration, which happened over the last 60, 70 years. So let me turn to Shabrinath and ask for his expert inputs on, as per Shabri, how do you see this whole impact of COVID on the labor force, especially the migrant workers in India? And, no doubt it's been one of the largest humanitarian crises in the history of India, post-partition. Your thoughts, Shabri?
Wow, thanks so much, Saurabh, and what a pleasure it is to be here. I mean, I've never been in this kind of webinar setting, so I must say, Isha, great introductions in the way you do it as well. Look, when we talk about migration, Saurabh, one thing is very clear. You mentioned about this being the largest humanitarian crisis, perhaps post-partition, in the case of India. But let's also not forget that we are now in the midst of repatriating the largest number of international migrant workers that the world has seen. So I want to give you that picture from both sides. I want to give you the picture from the international migration angle and from the internal migration angle so that we can have this conversation in a very holistic perspective. India is the largest migrant sending country in the world. 17.5 million migrant workers go from India. And out of these 17.5 million, over half of them are in the Middle East. And we know how it works when it comes to their vulnerabilities, exactly along the lines of what you mentioned, Saurabh. Now, these people, a majority of them have lost their jobs. So this is not a health crisis anymore. This is a wages crisis. This is a livelihoods crisis. It's a jobs crisis. And it comes under the broader umbrella of the economic crisis that we're talking about. Now, a lot of these international migrant workers are now coming back. So the Vande Bharat mission, coordinated by the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India, is the largest repatriation exercise that the world has seen. This is the reason why it's capturing international headlines on the international migration stage. So we've got that. A lot of these migrant workers coming back, not with those riyals and dirhams that we think that they have the oil money. That's not necessarily the case. These people are coming back, blue-collar workers. They have just paid a lot of recruitment fees within those supply chains that you were talking about. They've gone, they've not reaped the benefits of it, now have to come back. How are we going to reintegrate these people? These people are coming back with certain skills, with certain experiences. But do you think a welder who worked as a welder with a few months' experience in Dubai will get the same salary if he were to work here? So we've got all of those issues in that context as well. Let's not forget that these people lost their jobs, which means the employers may not have paid their wages on time. Even otherwise, constantly we hear about wage arrears and wage thefts. Now, if that is the case, when they come back, what kind of justice mechanism do they have to be able to get these wages? As an example, remittances. India was the largest recipient of remittances in the world. 2019, last year, $83 billion. Was what we received just in remittances. So we've got that angle now, and we're going to lose all of that. Now comes the internal migration side. You mentioned over 4 crore Indian migrant workers within India. This is the records that you see. The 2011 census, Saurabh, tell us that there are over 450 million migrants in India. Out of the 450 million migrants, only 40 million or only over 40 million, that's 4 crores that you mentioned, are migrant workers. I question that. It's something that I think it's worth for us to think about, because I think that's a severe underestimation, that there are only over 4 crore migrant workers when we hear that so many more are now constantly under the pressure to move. What happened to these people? The lockdown resulted in them being asked to leave. No jobs, no incomes, no shelter. Having to leave, therefore, how do you get back home when transport is closed? No chance. So you walk back home. Again, in a country with a population as dense as ours, how are we going to have social distancing? The only way we can have social distancing in a population of 1.3 billion people is if we start pushing people either into the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, or the Indian Ocean. This is the only able to maintain a 6 feet distance from everybody. But all in all, none of this, and the same thing, wage theft, issues pertaining to social security, compromised occupational safety and health, and all of these issues have affected internal migrant workers as well. The very fact, and I'll stop with this because Saurabh, I want to hear from you as well, is also the element that we are hearing when we are coming to when these migrant workers decided to walk back home and they were not allowed back into their own states. There were reports of them being disinfected on the roads, on the streets, and clearly a big, massive social issue as much as it is an economic issue. But that leads me to ask, how do you think this is applying supply chains? You are the supply chain expert. And I wanted to get that better perspective from you, because the industry is a very important player here. The employers in particular. ILO is a tripartite institution. For us, the employers are as important as the unions, and of course, along with the government. Where do you see industry in this larger puzzle?
Thanks, Shabri. No, absolutely. When we talk about the impact, looking at India or Indian economy, you would have also read about, Shabri, several analyst reports. IMF have also put out a projection saying that Indian economy will contract 5%. Then others who've even projected higher level of contractions. So the short-term economic impact, of course, has been substantial because there have been significant number of job losses, salary reductions that have happened across sectors. And if you look at sectors like travel, hospitality, oil and gas, manufacturing, non-food retail, and many other smaller businesses, I think they have been severely impacted. Overall, Indian economy is, of course, going to not grow, rather, it is going to contract this year, is what all analysts have put out. We, of course, do know about the fact that most of the workers, these migrant workers who work across these sectors, there are hardly any social protection schemes that you also mentioned about, Shabri. And therefore, when the pandemic happened, they were the first of the lot to be relieved from their organizations or from the jobs that they were in. However, what I see now is as this whole containment measures are being lifted, of course, the economy is supposed to revive. There are manufacturing organizations which are starting to run their factories now in a limited manner because of making sure that they maintain all the social distancing norms and other protocols laid out by the government. And I know because I talk to many companies and industries, they are struggling in terms of having the right manpower, the skilled manpower, even though they were casual labor or migrant workforce, but they're not available now. Talking about, for example, the whole diamond industry, that is based at Surat, the whole diamond polishing and cutting industry, they're not still able to operate because 2/3 of the workers are not available as we talk today. So is the case with many of the major towns where we have larger industries or major states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Delhi, etc. And therefore, I think the impact has been significant, and the economic impact as a result of lesser manufacturing activity, lesser economic activity, it is there. So let me turn around here, Shabri, given that the challenge that the industry is facing right now, because they don't have workers, they want to run their factories. There is demand coming back, but they don't have those workforce available to them. So Shabri, in your view, knowing the vulnerabilities of the migrant workforce, how do you think government, industry, and the unions, what actions they need to do to really bring them back again, to these major towns and cities?
So what are we talking about with regards to vulnerabilities? Going back to the point you mentioned, it's a big statement, sort of, when you say that that we will see a revival of the economy. But along with revival comes survival. What is it going to be? Are we going to revive, or are we going to ensure that people who are really at the bottommost rung of that pyramid are also going to be able to survive along with the revival? So within that, we have seen a whole range of vulnerabilities. We have seen that what this has led to is almost a total reduction of trust between the principal employer and the migrant worker. And then if there is a whole group of people in between, which is your supply chains that we're talking about, the contractors, the subcontractors, and so on, then where does this leave in with regards to that relationship, building that trust again between the employer and the worker? So I think that will be key. It's a vulnerability, but that will also be key when it comes to ensuring that people come back. We need to ensure that better trust is built. How do we build this trust? We build this trust by ensuring social dialogue. This is a moment for us to actually work with industry, with trade unions, and with government to constantly bring the three together. If we can, we should. It's not us. We facilitate it as the International Labour Organization, but the three constituents coming together will help contribute to a whole range of other vulnerabilities that we've seen migrant workers face, including in the fact that migrant workers have not been able to collectively bargain. The aspect of collectivization, joining trade unions has not been a possibility for them. Let's not forget that 95% or more than 90% certainly of the Indian economy workforce is in the informal sector. And majority of those informal workers are migrant workers. So how do we ensure their collectivization? How do we ensure their trade union membership? How do we ensure that they have grievance redressal mechanisms? So, for instance, now we are hearing in the context of industry, we've been speaking to industry focal points, and they've been telling us that right now they're working at 30 to 40% workforce. And they're saying, what, maybe we are okay with this. Maybe we will look at automation. We will now focusing on that. We will now focus on mechanization of the industry. But if that is the case, if you're ready to work with 30 to 40%, now those people need to be reskilled, upskilled, retrained. Somebody needs to operate that machine. Somebody needs to be able to turn that power button on and understand how that machine works. So that also links us to the future of work. That then brings me, Abhishek, to actually, to actually ask you, how do you see the future of work now? Is it about automation alone? Is there a human-centered approach to this perspective? Or do you think it's also about, because I hear industry also talk about incentives to migrant workers. I don't think it's about incentives. To an extent, it's a labor right for a migrant worker. So how do you draw that, how do you reconcile these differences?
I like your earlier point also around social dialogue. To my mind, even the future of work also rests heavily on that whole social dialogue and the social responsibility we all have. Certainly this whole virus and the whole shutdown scenario that evolved over the last 3 months now, I think it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for the supply chain managers, manufacturing CEOs. Now is that presumed it is limited 30-40% of FMCG organization. If you see, they are at 100% as well. But then, definitely there is a challenge because, this or COVID is here to stay. And there is a chance of infection happening in the plant or in the warehouse or in your transporter, your suppliers. Therefore, full production continues to be at risk. So that's where, in my experience of the last few weeks and maybe 2 months, I would say now, a lot of dialogue with organizations where there is a clear ask on automation. In fact, yesterday evening only, I was talking to the CEO of a large FMCG organization. There is a very clear thinking about that they need to start putting in place a roadmap for automation, whether it's robotics or cobots or something like that, to really reduce the dependence on some of these, I would say, labor, enhance productivity, and also prevent the any future shutdowns, in scenarios like this, whenever a crisis hits you all of a sudden. One big change that I've seen in my discussions is till pre-crisis, automation, digitalization was largely looked at as mostly from an innovation perspective, reducing cost or competitive edge perspective. Now, the focus is more around survival and minimizing damage and minimizing lost sales. That's how companies are with whole automation requirements. The last quick point from my side, Chabri, is that I think the degree of adoption of automation is going to vary. I don't think it's going to be en masse automation, and we forget about labor, workforce, or human-centric approach that you spoke about. I think both will go hand in hand. There is going to be a huge relearning opportunity, if I can use that word, even for our migrant workers, our labor force, for them to go through the next 2 years as this journey towards higher adoption of technology, would intensify. That's really what I see. Again, one of the latest trends, and I'm sure you also read about it, Chabri, is some of the governments in India of late, they have also looked to suspend or relax some of the labor laws. Some of the states like UP, MP, Gujarat, etc. And they're talking about attracting more industries, outside of the country, more foreign investment with them, etc. I'm sure the labor law suspension has its own pros and cons, and I will possibly not get into that. But I would really like to hear from you, Shabri, at this point in time. Do you think this is the right way forward, for the governments to relax labor laws? And what kind of challenges, pitfalls do you see, in such a scenario?
You're absolutely right, Saurabh. First, I appreciate you saying that there will be a degree of automation, that the degree of automation is going to vary. But coming back to labor laws, absolutely. Look, it's what are any laws for? Laws are made with the idea of protecting people and serving people in the first place. So we need to ensure, and if it is labor laws, then it is about protecting labor. It's about ensuring that workers get their due. It's also about ensuring that employers have their say in terms of, because they are, after all, the ones that contribute to the economy by bringing in profits and revenue and so on. They are the revenue generators. So it is. All in all, labor laws protect the well-being of both the employers and the workers. They're an important means to advance what the ILO would say, social justice, and promote decent work for all. I mean, decent work runs on 4 pillars. It works on productive employment. Decent work is about social dialogue. Decent work is about labor standards, and decent work is about social protection. So if we can ensure all these 4 angles where labor law plays such an important role, we would certainly be able to ensure that things don't get out of hand in a way. Consequently, the formulation of labor laws and revisions are most effective when it emanates through social dialogue. So my way of looking at it is, if these state governments have come to such a decision, and I hear that it's not fully endorsed or it's going to be repealed, then if that is the they done in a tripartite manner, where the workers and the employers consulted, because that helps build a climate of trust amongst these stakeholders, which is because it is built through social dialogue and tripartism. I mean, in the larger sense, we need to also keep in mind that these 44 labor laws are now being amalgamated into 4 labor codes. These labor codes are the wage code, the social security code, the OSH code, and the industrial relations code. These are the 4 codes now. Where does the one out of those 44 labor laws, one was the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. I mean, we need to keep in mind that there are women migrant workers as well, but it was called the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979. That will now be subsumed into the OSH code. Now, if we make sure that all the particularities within that act are now reflected in the OSH code.
Right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Nair, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Jain for joining in. Both of you all shared your views out here, and I'm sure our delegates had a lot to learn from. So once again, thank you both for joining in.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Isha.